If Floyd had not missed my exit on Cannon Street that November night, I would have gone home, put the kettle on, and walked straight into the worst thing I never saw coming. My name is Thea Warwick. I am 63 years old, and I have lived in Hamilton, Ontario for most of my adult life. The city is not beautiful in the way people mean when they use that word. It is a working city, a steel city, a city of escarpments and lake wind and neighborhoods that have seen better decades and survived them anyway. My husband and I chose it deliberately 36 years ago when we were young and practical and full of the kind of love that does not need scenery to feel real. My husband was a claims officer with the WSIB, the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board of Ontario. For nearly 30 years, he spent his career reviewing injury files, making sure injured workers received what they were owed, flagging discrepancies when the numbers did not line up. He was careful and thorough, and the kind of man who believed paperwork mattered because people were behind every page. He died of a stroke 8 months before the night Floyd missed my exit on a Tuesday afternoon in February while I was at the grocery store buying milk. We did not have much left over after everything. The mortgage was paid, but the house needed a new furnace, the property taxes in Hamilton were not small, and a retirement that had made sense when there were 2 of us made no sense at all when there was only 1. My daughter lived in Vancouver. She called when she could. But our conversations had grown careful and short in the way that grief makes distances wider. She had her own life. I had mine, which had suddenly become very quiet. I found work at a provincial records archive in the lower city, just off James Street North. The facility stored civil case files, WSIB settlement documentation, sealed depositions, and evidentiary materials related to active and historical litigation. My job was to log incoming files, verify chain of custody, and flag any inconsistencies in the documentation. The work required attention and discretion, and it suited someone who, after 3 decades of life with a meticulous man, understood why those things mattered. It paid just enough. My shift ran from 4 in the afternoon until midnight. I had relied on the Hamilton Street Railway until the late route on my line was cut. After that, I had no good option for getting home at midnight on foot. My daughter, during one of our short calls, insisted I start using a local cab company. I resisted the cost for 2 weeks and then gave in. That was how I met Floyd. The first time his cab pulled up outside the archive building, I hesitated. It was late October, cold already, the kind of Hamilton cold that comes off the lake and settles into your collar before you know it is there. Floyd was in his late 50s, heavy-set, with a slow way of moving and eyes that looked like they had been paying attention for a very long time. He did not speak first. He waited until I gave him the address, then nodded and pulled into traffic. He drove the same way he listened, without rush, without unnecessary movement. Over the next few weeks, Floyd was consistently the driver who accepted my midnight call. Same company, same cab number, same silence that was not uncomfortable but deliberate. He did not ask personal questions. He did not make conversation for the sake of it. What he did, I came to understand, was notice. He noticed when I seemed wrung out. He noticed when I was cold. He noticed when I sat differently, when I exhaled differently, when the air inside the cab felt heavier than it had the ride before. He said nothing about most of it. He simply drove. In early November, I started bringing him muffins. Banana chocolate chip. Baked on Wednesday evenings after work, Because Wednesday was the hardest night to get through alone in the house, and baking gave my hands something to do. The first Thursday, I handed him the foil-wrapped package through the front seat. He looked at it for a long moment before he said anything. "You did not have to do that," he said. "I know," I told him, "but Thursday is long." He accepted it the way he accepted most things, quietly, without making it into more than it was. What I learned about Floyd came in pieces, over many rides. He had worked as a pipe fitter for 22 years, mostly on industrial sites across southern Ontario. A scaffold collapse in 2017 fractured 2 vertebrae in his lower back and ended that work permanently. His WSIB settlement had been a fraction of what it should have been. He mentioned this once, without bitterness, the way you mention a fact you have already finished being angry about. He drove nights because the hours allowed him to stop at his mother's house in Stony Creek on his way home each morning. She was 81, and her memory came and went in unpredictable waves. And Floyd had arranged his entire schedule around those waves without being asked. He had a daughter he did not speak with. He told me this in December, during a slow snowfall that made the drive quiet and long. She had stopped calling after a period of distance that had stretched too long to feel fixable. He had worked too much when she was small, he said. He had believed that providing was the same as being present, and by the time he understood they were different things, she had already made peace with his absence. His hands tightened on the steering wheel when he said it. He did not elaborate, and I did not ask. What I did not know then was that Floyd had also been listening to other passengers the way he listened to me, carefully, completely, storing what he heard like a man who understood the difference between noise and information. By December, I had been assigned to a deeper audit at work. Several WSIB settlement files that had been marked as finalized were turning up incomplete when examined against the originals. Scanned document totals did not match their physical counterparts. Settlement amounts had been reduced by small percentages, not dramatic enough to trigger immediate review on their own, but consistent and always affecting the most vulnerable claimants. Injured construction workers, older laborers with limited documentation, recent newcomers to Canada who had signed what was placed in front of them without fully understanding its contents. My supervisor had initially suspected clerical error. After 3 weeks, she suspected otherwise and asked me to begin mapping the pattern. I mentioned none of this in detail to Floyd. I mentioned only that the audit was running longer than expected, that Tuesdays and Thursdays, I often stayed past midnight waiting for my supervisor to review flagged files before I could lock them away. He nodded. He stored the information somewhere behind his eyes. In early January, I began noticing things outside my house. A dark pickup truck with no front plates parked across the street, 3 nights running, there when I arrived, gone by morning. My side gate had been left unlatched one night when I was certain I had closed it. A notepad I kept near the telephone disappeared. I had used it to jot down file reference numbers during a call with my supervisor, and a few pages held work notes. Shorthand I used to track document inconsistencies. I told myself I had misplaced it. My mind was full those days with the audit and the hydro bill and the silence of the house in the evening. I told myself Hamilton had plenty of trucks that parked and moved without meaning anything. Floyd did not like that explanation. He had begun, I learned much later, to notice a different kind of pattern. a passenger he had been picking up late on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Drunk, loose-tongued, careless with what he said out loud in the back seat of a cab he seemed to regard as invisible. This man had spoken about the archive, about audits, about a woman in records who was asking the right questions at the wrong time for the wrong people, and he had spoken about my street. Not once, 3 times. Each time with the flat repetition of someone committing an address to memory. Floyd had started keeping notes in his phone after the second mention. Dates, times, exact phrases. He had also, under the terms of his taxi license agreement, which in Ontario permits audio recording in the cab for driver safety, begun recording certain rides. I knew none of this as February came. I knew only that the winter felt heavier than usual, that midnight felt later than it ever had, and that the 12 minutes from the archive to my front door had become the only part of my day that felt like it was held by anything solid. The night Floyd missed my exit, snow had been falling since mid-afternoon. Not a storm, just the slow, persistent kind that muffles Hamilton and turns headlights into soft hellos. I came out of the archive at midnight, handed Floyd the last banana muffin from the week's batch, and settled into the back seat, expecting the familiar left turn onto Cannon Street. He went straight. "Floyd," I said, "you missed the turn." His jaw was set. His hands were at 10 and 2. The cab moved steadily through the snow. "I need you to stay calm," he said, "and I need you to listen." My stomach dropped in the particular way that happens when your body understands something your mind has not yet caught up to. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere quiet." He kept his eyes on the road. "What I have to tell you is not something I can say on your street." He turned into the parking lot of a closed Canadian Tire on Barton Street, pulled to the far end away from the road, and cut the engine. The snow settled against the windows. He turned to face me fully, and for the first time I noticed how tired he looked beneath the steadiness. "Do you know a man named Aldous Pemberton?" he asked. The name hit me like a dropped file. I had seen it twice in the archive, cross-referenced in older documentation connected to my current audit. I had not followed that thread yet. "I have seen the name," I said slowly. "Why?" He exhaled. "I have driven him 14 times in the past 2 months. Always late. Always after your shift ends. Always drunk enough to forget there is a person in the front seat who is listening." My pulse thudded in my ears. "He talks about the archive," Floyd continued. "He talks about files being moved. He talks about someone running an audit who is going to be a problem for people who cannot afford problems." Floyd unlocked his phone and held it toward me. "And 2 weeks ago, he said your street out loud. He said he needed to find out what you might have taken home with you." "I have never taken anything home." My voice came out quieter than I intended. "Everything stays locked. Everything is logged." "I believe you," Floyd said, "but he does not." He swiped the screen. Dates and times, exact phrases written in careful shorthand. My street name appeared 3 separate times. "He has been watching your place," Floyd said. "That pickup truck. I recognize the make. I saw it on your block 2 nights ago when I drove past to check." "You drove past my house?" "Yes, because the previous night he told me Tuesday would be a good opportunity. That your house was dark after midnight, that the side gate was not secure." I felt the cold move through me that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. His voice dropped. "Last Tuesday, I parked at the end of your block. I watched him. He got out of that truck, walked to your side gate, and spent 4 minutes in your backyard. "The notepad," I said. "The notes from work." "He did not get inside the house," Floyd said. "But he did not leave quickly either." I pressed my hands together in my lap to stop them from shaking. "Why are you only telling me this tonight?" "Because last night he said something different." Floyd's voice was controlled and deliberate. He said he needed to move soon. Before the audit went any further, he said he had already found what he needed to know. I sat with that. What does he want? Floyd leaned back slightly. He wants the audit to stop. He wants any notes or documentation you might have at home to disappear. And I think he wants to make sure you understand that continuing to ask questions is not in your interest. The parking lot was silent. Snow ticked softly against the windshield. "There is more," Floyd said. He pressed play on his phone. A voice filled the cab. Low, slightly slurred, the voice of a man who had been drinking and felt entirely comfortable. "She is thorough, but she is slow. If she reaches the cross-references before we move the originals, it becomes a problem that cannot be managed quietly. I need to get ahead of this before Thursday." That recording was from 3 nights ago. Floyd looked at me. "I have 6 more like it. Different nights, same subject." We sat in that parking lot for a long time. The snow kept falling. I thought about the notepad. I thought about the gate. I thought about how many times I had come home at midnight and walked directly inside without looking at anything at all, because I had believed that my quiet life was invisible to everyone except me. "We need to go to the police," I finally said. "Yes," Floyd agreed. He started the engine tonight. The Hamilton Police Service on King William Street was open and slow at 1 in the morning, the particular slow of places that never fully close, but never fully wake either. A constable took our initial statement, his pen moving steadily across the page, his expression neutral, until Floyd placed his phone on the table and pressed play on the first recording. Then his expression changed. He stepped out and returned with a detective. A woman in her mid-40s with short gray hair and the manner of someone who had been doing this long enough to know immediately which details mattered and which ones were filling air. "Aldous Pemberton," she said, reading from Floyd's notes. She was quiet for a moment. "He currently holds a contract security position with a private facilities management company. Overnight coverage." "Which facilities?" I asked. She looked at me directly. "Your archive on James Street North, and 2 satellite storage facilities in Ancaster." The room seemed to shift sideways. "He is inside the building," I said. "He already has access." "Yes. His clearance level permits him entry to the document vault between midnight and 6 a.m. "He is not breaking in," I said. "He belongs there. He is the one moving the originals." She nodded. "We believe so." She leaned forward and slid a printed photograph across the table. A news clipping from the Hamilton Spectator, dated 2013. A small piece about a WSIB contractor fraud referral. In the photograph, my husband stood among a group of case officers outside an office building. His name was in the caption. I recognized his posture before I read a single word. Aldous Pemberton was named as the primary respondent. In that fraud referral, the detective said carefully, "Your husband was one of the case officers who identified the original discrepancy. Pemberton had been inflating medical documentation on WSIB compensation applications for a network of subcontractors, redirecting reimbursement funds before they reached the claimants. When the file was referred for prosecution, Pemberton lost his contractor designation permanently. He was removed from all WSIB-related work. My husband never mentioned that name to me, I said. Not once. He probably believed the matter was resolved, she replied. Pemberton did not. Everything I had thought I understood rearranged itself. The truck, the gate, the notepad. The moment Pemberton had seen my surname on the archive's staff directory and put it together with a case from more than a decade ago, it had not been random. I had not been a stranger to him. He did not choose the archive. For the work alone, the detective continued. When he found your name on the employee list and connected it to your husband's role in the original case, the situation became personal as well as practical. You were both a threat to what he had been doing inside the building, and a reminder of what your husband had cost him. I covered my mouth and said nothing for a long moment. Warrants moved quickly after that. By 4 in the morning, officers had located Pemberton. By 6, they had searched his storage unit in Stony Creek and found 114 altered WSIB settlement documents with originals removed, replacement pages printed on period-accurate paper stock, a handwritten ledger tracking settlement amounts before and after adjustment, and a separate envelope containing photographs of my house, my front path, my side gate, my backyard, my mudroom window. There was also a printed list with 3 names on it. Mine was at the top. Beside it, written in red marker, was the word Thursday and a date. 3 days from that night. Floyd's recordings became the structural backbone of the Crown's case. His notes established a timeline. The audio established intent in Pemberton's own voice, captured across multiple dates, impossible to characterize as misunderstood. I did not go home for nearly 2 weeks. A constable confirmed that the side gate latch had been deliberately manipulated and that my mudroom window had been unlatched from outside. Pemberton had been inside my house, not to take anything. There was nothing to take, but to look, to confirm what was and was not there. The trial ran 11 days in October. The courtroom held the particular stillness of a room where outcomes have weight. I testified on the 4th day and described my work, the audit, the discrepancies had found, the truck on my street, the gate, the missing notepad. My voice held steady until I reached the part about Floyd driving past the turn on Cannon Street. And then it did not. Floyd testified the following morning. He described his notes, his recordings, the exact words he had heard spoken in the back of his cab on 14 separate nights. He spoke the way he drove, without decoration, without rush, with complete steadiness. The Crown asked him why he had started keeping records. He said he had once failed to act on something he had noticed, and he had spent years understanding what that silence had cost someone else. He was not going to make that choice again. The defense tried to characterize Floyd as a driver who had assigned significance to drunken rambling. Then the Crown played the recordings. The courtroom shifted in a way you could feel before you could name it. Aldous Pemberton was convicted on all counts, fraud exceeding $5,000, evidence tampering, criminal harassment, and attempted break and enter with intent to intimidate. The total value of redirected WSIB settlement funds exceeded $420,000, the majority of it taken from claimants who had never been informed their compensation had been reduced below what the law required. The sentence was 8 years. He would be in his late 60s when he was eligible for release. I expected relief when the verdict came. What I felt was closer to exhaustion. The particular exhaustion of having been frightened for a long time without knowing the full shape of what you were frightened of. The archive reopened under new management and additional provincial oversight. The audit I had been quietly conducting was transferred to a regulatory review body. More altered files were identified across facilities in Hamilton, Burlington, and Stony Creek. Letters went out to affected claimants. Restitution proceedings were opened for workers who had been underpaid on settlements years earlier. People who had moved on, who had assumed the system had given them everything it had to give, who did not know until those letters arrived that they had been shorted. The new clerk, who started in January, was in her late 20s, working the night shift because the daytime rate at the archive was not enough to cover rent and child care together. I recognized the tightness in her shoulders from the first week she started, the way she hesitated before asking anyone a question, as though she were not entirely sure she had the right to take up space. The way she moved through the building, like someone who was waiting to be told she did not belong there. On her third Thursday, I brought her a piece of banana bread wrapped in foil. She looked at it for a moment in the way people look at something unexpectedly kind when they are not used to expecting kindness. "You did not have to do that," she said. "I know," I told her, "but Thursday is long." Floyd kept driving nights. He drove me home every Thursday and Friday, as he always had. But I sat in the front seat now, and we talked. About his mother, about the escarpment trail he had started walking on mornings when the pain in his back was manageable, about what it had meant to my husband to spend his career making sure injured workers received what they were owed, about what it costs a person, over time, to stay quiet when they know something is wrong. Floyd had stayed quiet once, 15 years earlier, when he had noticed signs in a co-worker's home situation that he had not known how to name and so had not named at all. That co-worker's wife had been seriously hurt 3 months later. Floyd had carried that for a long time. He had carried it the way working people carry things they cannot put down. Silently, without drama, integrated into the weight of every ordinary day. In April, his phone rang while we sat in traffic on the Burlington Street Bridge. He let it ring twice, then answered. His voice changed the moment he heard who it was. Careful, uncertain, like a man picking up something he had not held in a very long time and was not sure he still had the right to hold. It was his daughter. She had read the coverage in The Spectator, a brief piece about a Hamilton taxi driver whose recordings had been central to a WSIB document fraud conviction, about a man described by the Crown prosecutor as someone who had paid attention when it would have been easier not to. She had recognized her father in the description before she had seen his name. She wanted to talk. When Floyd hung up, he pulled to the curb on Burlington Street and sat with both hands in his lap. He did not say anything for almost a full minute. Then he put both hands over his face and cried the way men cry when they have not done it in a very long time. All at once, with no warning, a sound like something that had been held under pressure and suddenly was not anymore. I put my hand on his arm. I did not try to say anything that would make it smaller or neater than it was. Some moments only need to be witnessed by someone who is not going to look away. My daughter flew in from Vancouver 2 weeks after the verdict. She had planned 4 days. She stayed for 11. We went through her father's things together, box by box, drawer by drawer, the things we had both been avoiding for close to a year, because neither of us could do it alone, and neither of us had been ready to ask the other for help. We talked about him the way you can only talk about a person once you have stopped being afraid of how much it will hurt. Directly, specifically, with the particular tenderness of two people who loved the same man and miss him in different ways. She met Floyd on the Sunday. He brought his mother, who smiled at my daughter with the easy warmth of a woman who had decided somewhere along the way that she would simply be glad about whatever and whoever was in the room with her. We made a pot of soup. We sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours. Outside, Hamilton was gray and cold and entirely itself. Inside, it was something I had not felt in over a year. I am 63 years old. I still live in my house in the East End of Hamilton. I still work nights. I still bake on Wednesdays when the silence gets too loud and my hands need something to do. What I know now that I did not know before is that routine can be both a comfort and a blindfold. I moved through my nights believing that nothing would change because nothing had changed yet. I did not understand how carefully someone else had been studying my ordinary life, until that life nearly ended without me ever knowing why. I did not bring Floyd muffins because I thought it would matter. I brought them because grief had taught me, in the specific and ungentle way that grief teaches things, what it feels like to move through the world without anyone noticing that you are there. In return, he noticed. He paid attention when it would have been far simpler not to. He chose because of something he had once failed to choose, not to be quiet again. That is what saved my life. Not luck, not anything dramatic. Just a man who had learned what silence costs, and a woman who, without thinking about it, had treated a stranger like a person worth seeing. I gave my night driver muffins every Thursday. One night he missed my exit on Cannon Street, and because he did, I am still here to tell you this story.